All right. Again, welcome to our church town hall on Regathering.
Let me see.
And I'm going to ask if folks can mute themselves during this piece. That will make things a little easier for me, I think. Thank you all. Welcome. Glad you're here. This is our church town hall on Regathering, and we're recording this so that we can share it with others who couldn't be here, but so glad to have everyone who is able to be here. So I wanted to start by giving just an update on the process of what conversations around regathering have looked like at Green Street so far. So I looked back at just some key dates to give you an idea. Obviously, this has been kind of swirling around in our consciousness for a year and a half now. When might it be safe to regather? How might we do that? So this is really just capturing kind of the more formal steps of having these conversations and making decisions. So on March 7th, the Leadership Council met, I believe, for the second time in 2021. And at that meeting, they recommended forming a regathering work group, a temporary committee that was tasked with exploring opportunities for regathering. And the recommendation was that that would include representatives from staff, from folks who work in public health and medical fields, from the anti-racism team, from music, from children's, from a wide variety of ministries within the church, as well as expertise in more broadly, or especially around medicine and health. We also had some representatives from trustees and the building committee. And so that group began to be gathered over the course of the next few weeks. On April 11th, the Leadership Council met again, affirmed the regathering work group as it had been constituted, and we discussed some initial opportunities for and concerns about regathering. And just to note, all along with all of this, there has been quite the mix of folks who are really, really ready to be back in person and folks who just are not ready to be back in person. And we expect that there will be that mix moving forward. And as we talk through this, a lot of what we're going to be trying to figure out how to do is how to stay connected, even when we're at different places in that process. April 18th was the first meeting of the regathering work group. And that meeting was really focused just on establishing values and principles to guide our planning. We used some breakout rooms and small group discussions to talk about, how do we not just the how, but the why, under what conditions, with what values in mind, so that as we regather, we maintain who we are as Green Street and our commitments to justice. And we'll talk a little more about what those values and principles that we landed on and how we're using those as lenses for decision making. On April 25th in worship, Lori gave a general update on the work group and invited folks to give feedback via the Google form in the green light. And just to, in general, in that form were a lot of folks saying that they were hopeful to get back to worship soon, offering ideas for how to facilitate that. We did have at least one person say they thought it was too soon. Again, here's that mix that we're just going to be navigating. On May 1st, the regathering work group met again and began applying the shared values and principles to more concrete opportunities. And I can't see my notes. On May 2nd, the Leadership Council met and reviewed the regathering work group's work so far and affirmed some particular opportunities that we're working towards that we'll talk about as we go. What's next? So right now, one of our next steps is having this town hall. So we're here to share information. We're here to get feedback. We're here to talk about questions and concerns that you all might have and we'll bring those back to the regathering work group. May 23rd, the regathering work group has its next meeting. And then on June 6th, the Leadership Council meets next. So we expect that over the next couple of weeks, some more specific plans will take shape. Some are already in place that we'll be sharing. And so we just encourage you in the next couple of weeks to stay tuned, to be in prayer for us throughout this process. So some of the values that the regathering work group landed on after our first meeting, none of these will really be a surprise. They're integral to who Green Street is, but it was fruitful, I think, to talk about them specifically in the context of regathering. So radical hospitality is an important part of who Green Street is, and that's been expressed in a lot of different ways and presents some challenges for regathering in an ongoing pandemic. Inclusion is important. It's similar to hospitality, but it has a certain kind of valence for us. Service to the community, racial equity, relationships, and safety. So these are all things that as we have these conversations, we need to be asking ourselves, okay, how do we embody hospitality, inclusion, service, equity, relationships, and safety in this way and in this decision making? To give you some, the Western North Carolina Conference has been updating COVID-19 guidelines throughout the pandemic. The most recent guidelines, and in general, they followed Governor Roy Cooper's recommendations. It's largely just aligned with whatever the state has said, while also just encouraging churches to love their neighbors by exercising caution, being attentive to their context. The current guidelines were last updated on April 29th. And they say that there should be no more than 50% capacity as long as social distancing can be maintained. And we've looked a little bit at our space, and there we probably would be at less than 50% to actually get spacing with our pews, but that's something that we'll be looking at more closely again. Masks must be worn throughout the service. There's a recommendation for no full choir or congregational singing, but humming or quiet singing by a masked congregation is fine. Our musicians in the mix know that singing and music has been a very contentious and confusing issue throughout this, so I was grateful for that actual specific recommendation. You'll notice April 29th was before the CDC's most recent guidelines were released, and there has not been an update issued since then, but the cabinet, which is kind of the bishop and the district superintendents of our conference, is meeting this coming week. And so we expect that there will probably be an update shared after that, and we'll communicate that and incorporate that into our decision making as appropriate. So the Regathering work group identified 3 general opportunities that align with some specific plans for regathering in the coming weeks and months. And the first is some kind of worship in the building. A lot of people really miss being in our beautiful sanctuary. I miss not being alone in our sanctuary on Sunday morning, so I completely understand that. And what I am recommending for now is that we start by going back to having an early service in person, perhaps in mid-June, and continue the virtual worship at 11 o'clock as is until we can relaunch that service as a hybrid in-person/online gathering. And we can talk about that a little bit more, but I think it's important that we be able to continue to live stream 11 o'clock even when we're back in person. And I don't want us to go back to in-person 11 o'clock until we can do that well. So again, some kind of worship in the building, probably starting with an adaptation of the early service that we had before COVID. Number 2 are some outdoor fellowship and formation gatherings. So the Children's Council is taking a lead on a series of intergenerational gatherings on June 12th, June 26th, July 10th, July 24th, and August 7th. And I'll probably have Miss Kim share. I guess I don't have to, I can just call her Kim when it's not with the kids, I guess. I'll have Kim share a little bit more about that in a bit. And then the third sort of bucket that we're looking at is exploring the option for an outdoor worship gathering. We actually looked into doing this at one point last fall, and folks were kind of hesitant and not sure, and we ended up not doing it, but we think that that could be a good opportunity to gather folks together to kind of capture the spirit of 11 o'clock worship at Green Street in an outdoor setting that's safer. So we don't have specific plans for that yet, but that's a desire that's been expressed that we've said we'll look into. Got to take a moment to address the new CDC guidelines about masks. So the new guidance has been a cause for celebration for some and consternation and confusion for others. So many are concerned for the safety and inclusion of unvaccinated people, including children. I know that the Pfizer vaccine has just been opened up to children as young as 12, but then that's still anyone under 12 cannot be vaccinated. And even though COVID rates are much lower among children, it's still a concern. I'm just named for myself. I am reticent to segregate a congregation in this way and to say vaccinated people don't have to mask, but unvaccinated people have to. And just trying to think through all of that, it feels, I'm going to use a technical theological term, it feels icky to me. And so that's something that there may be a point in the pandemic where it does feel more natural to be in spaces that are a mix of masked and unmasked. But I think with this guidance being so new, I'm still at a place where if we're going to gather indoors, I'm probably going to say that we need to all be masked. And then just in thinking about this, asking the question of how do we use our values and principles as lenses through which to make such decisions? So, if we're thinking about the possibility of requiring vaccination in order to go maskless in our sanctuary, does that mean that we would ask folks vaccination status? And is that a practice we actually want to take on? Another question that I saw raised by a colleague of mine, even if we knew that all of our members were vaccinated and decided it was safe to worship without masks, would we expect a new visitor of unknown status or who was unvaccinated to come be the only one wearing a mask? And how does that express or not express hospitality? So this is something that we're going to need to just stay in conversation with and be flexible about, but I wanted to make sure that we address that, and I let you all know where I'm at with that right now. And to frame things with a little more theology, so this is a quote from Tracy Blackman, who's a leader in the United Church of Christ, Pastora Maria's denomination. And she says, as we ponder the validity of the CDC's most recent announcement, while the US remains at 35% immunization rate and new cases and deaths, although significantly decreased, continue. As we reflect upon the surge of mutations that has now brought India to a full stop, might I suggest the voice of individualism will tell us to count it a victory if I am okay, while the voice of the divine would ask, what about others? History has proven we don't ever go far when we are alone. We are not yet well. Talked this morning in our sermon about how we are one body, and I think that metaphor becomes very literal in some ways when we're talking about a pandemic, and even as we start to emerge from it, trying to think about us as a we and not just as individual I's, particularly when it comes to a public worship setting. I know a lot of folks are starting to gather in different ways with people that they know who are vaccinated, who have consented to be in spaces together, but it's a little different when it's a public worship setting. There was a statement released by the Main Council of Churches that noted that congregational worship is really more like traveling on public transportation, where there are people of mixed vaccination status together for an extended period of time without a lot of air filtration. And the CDC's guidance presumes a group of all vaccinated people, and that when it comes to church stuff, we might think of it in a slightly different way. So again, this is a rapidly evolving conversation, but I think it's important to consider ourselves as a whole and think about hospitality as we make plans. So that is my whole presentation, but I wanted to go ahead and move to some questions and discussion. Again, we are in welcoming your feedback, your ideas, and I just want to remind y'all a couple of things as we move into conversation. First, we have never done this before. This is brand new to all of us, and we're all learning as we go, and I hope that we can all be gracious with one another in the process. We are not going to be able to meet everyone's needs all at the same time. That was something that really emerged in our last Regathering group and leadership council, that we're going to do our best to meet everyone where they are, and there's just going to be some tension, especially in this in the early stages of Regathering. And then lastly, we are all in this together, and we are all doing our very best. So with all of those things in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Lori to facilitate our conversation.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'll add a couple of other kind of agreements to get us started. There are 37 people on this call. That thrills me, and I know that others will watch it later on recording, and it makes, I think, some of these even more important. I'm going to borrow from Shayla Herndon Edmonds, a local consultant I just had the experience to first work with, and I love the way she phrased some of these, even though I had heard them before. So I will ask that we agree on these things for the conversation. Allow all voices to be heard. I love this, that she, it resembles me. When I saw this, she says, let two people speak before you grab the mic again. I think I found that particularly helpful. To be open to feedback and disagreement. As Sarah said, we know we're in different places, and will continue to be in different places, even as our own place changes over time. We're not in a static place ourselves. Check your assumptions. Is your way truly the only way? I think that's part of the all one body as well. And finally, embrace imperfection. We are all learning. I would say there's also an agreement often in anti-racist conversations of expect non-closure. This will not be the end of the conversation. It will not feel like we've said everything or know everything or are ready to tie this up in a bow. It's just not that kind of work. Do those sound okay? Are there any, something does not feel right and needs to be shifted? Or if that feels okay, thumbs up or some other nods. I'm seeing nods from those on video. Thank you so much. So folks have added things to the chat. So I want you to let you know if you're able to see that at the same time. It's certainly a great place with this many people to be able to add something if there's something in your mind or on your heart, to capture that, and we'll make sure that we get those and can kind of have those to reflect on as well too. So let's start there and make sure. I know Sarah has answered Julie's question that the early service had started at 8:45 with 15 minutes of silence, and then began in a full way at 9 o'clock. And as Lisa had asked about, could we have mass to hand out? And absolutely.
And just a note about the early service, we're looking at maybe shifting the order a little bit, so that, I think before the pandemic, there were a number of folks who were very accustomed to just coming in silence. And it kind of feels like as we're regathering and seeing each other for the first time, that maybe starting in silence might not be what folks want to do. And so we may shift that order a little bit, but we'll make some decisions about that exact start time.
Awesome. So, who would, any questions or feedback or feelings or thoughts? I know this is a big and deep topic.
I see that David has raised his hand.
Hey, I had some thoughts. I am so exquisitely perplexed and internally confused, but I have this sort of thing inside me that doesn't like the fact that some people chose not to get vaccinated. But when I look at that, a lot of them did it for a multiple number of reasons. The ones that did it for political reasons, I sort of want to say, well, that's great for you. Maybe it'll thin the herd. But just to kind of lay it on the table, I know that Jesus went and helped the lepers. And so that leaves me with the question of, okay, well, who are we as an inclusive church, which is one of the reasons I'm there? Do we open the doors to the lepers, to the dengue fevers, to the Ebola people? Do we, at some point, obviously the answer to those questions might be, well, if you're actively have Ebola, you're not coming in, or you shouldn't come in. But then Jesus helped the lepers. And so I'm just exquisitely conflicted, but I just wanted to get those thoughts on the table for some reactions.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, David. And I'll just name, you and I were both at Gas Hill for a show the other night, right? And they are doing limited seating, spread out. And then in their ticketing, they ask everyone attending that if you find out within 2 weeks that you were diagnosed with COVID, that you let folks know. So I think we will have to sort of think through what are our guidelines. A lot of places ask folks not to come in if they have symptoms. We'll have to think through what our guidelines will be, understanding that in some ways, hospitality is in tension with safety, and we're gonna have, that's a tension we're gonna have to hold. But I appreciate you bringing that question.
Who else?
I think it is, I would just say from a public health standpoint, I think it is very prudent and consistent with our values to ask people, if you are actively having symptoms, to not attend a church gathering at this time. That's just common sense, pandemic, caring for each other, group behavior.
And I'd ask the staff or others to address Judy's question in the chat of have we been approached or know of anything about being a possible vaccination clinic.
Yeah, and so I saw Ethan asked about considering streaming the early service. So my instinct is no. And right now, the reason is that if y'all could see my streaming setup, on Sunday mornings, you would know that it is not conducive to speaking to humans in a room, as well as my like multiple hymnals that my laptop is propped on with a light and microphone. It's a whole thing. And so part of not moving right to 11 o'clock is that we have a grant that we're working on getting dispersed so that we can purchase installable live streaming equipment that can then be run much more easily. My my instinct is to let the early service just be a space for folks who really want to be in person. I think that that's something we could revisit down the line, but for now, I'm thinking not stream that service.
I would add to that that the Regathering Committee in our conversations has talked about of all the things that we can do, and knowing that capacity and our own limits and energy and staff and volunteers and figuring things out where everything is new, that one way to approach it is, in what ways can we offer something for everyone that is holding a particular need and hope? So for those that desperately want to experience a service in the sanctuary, if they may be able to choose to attend early worship, that those that want the relationship and connection hopefully will be able to join for some of those Saturday times together. And I think just as much for those whose connection right now is through that online service, to not sacrifice that or exclude people, that's the way that they can best join us. So it feels in some ways more split, but also trying to allow it not meet everybody's needs at once, but wisely split our efforts so that we can hold the most of us that we can.
Yeah, thank you, Lori. And to David's question about 10 a.m. service merging the two, again, we are not currently set up to do that well, and I don't want to do that until we can do it well. I also think there's some value in holding some space that is not also determined by virtual stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That things feel different when you're starting to engage a virtual audience as well as folks in the congregation, and there may be some value in saying the early service this is just a space where whoever's here is who's here, and then the access is in a different place. Again, we can think about that later, but for now, just in terms of tech and capacity, that's sort of where we're at. I saw that Amaris raised her hand. Amaris, did you have a question?
Yes. I'm sorry. 1 second.
You're fine.
Hi. I just wanted to offer up that I'm in agreement that we should never. I don't think we should try to check people's vaccination status or do any kind of parsing out based on that. I do think that conflicts with the hospitality idea. So I just wanted to voice that, because I think that I just am in absolute agreement with that. And also wanted to offer up something someone told me recently about boundaries, and they said that boundaries enable us to better care for each other because you can feel safe and you can feel the freedom of knowing that this person knows your boundaries and they're going to observe your boundaries. So it's like you don't have to fear that you need to always do something else to keep yourself safe if you have made the boundaries clear and people have agreed to operate within those boundaries. It seems like it's limiting, but it is about freeing you to be yourself. So that was just a different way for me to think about boundaries. And I just wanted to offer that into our conversation as well. That's all.
Yeah. Thank you, Amaris. I really love that framing. And, I recognize we may end up asking some folks to do something that they maybe rather not do, but that is kind of necessary for other folks to feel safe, and that there's, in that negotiation, we're trying to figure out how do we all feel free to show up and participate together.
And I think both safe and welcome. We're holding, that's one of the tensions. And one of the things that makes Green Street so special is that everybody truly is welcome. And we don't want to lose that.
Yeah. Thank you, Amiris. David asked about our seating capacity. So the sanctuary period is 275. So you can cut that in half. But I know at one point we measured out distancing, but that was very early in the pandemic. And so we need to revisit that. And that's something that we'll have to sort of figure out. Yeah, we'll have to figure that out.
Wanda, did you have a question? You're muted.
I just had a comment. I like what's being proposed so far as we move forward. My biggest concerns are about risk to unvaccinated children, children who can't get vaccinated. And one personal concern I have is that I'm a hugger. I like to hug people that, I know. And when I returned to my old workplace last week, the solution was, hey, are you vaccinated? Are you comfortable with the hug? And went from there, but I don't know if that's appropriate in a church setting. So how do we navigate that?
Yeah, I appreciate both of those things. We've talked some, and I know Children's Council has been discussing safety with children. Some of the benefit of these outdoor intergenerational gatherings is that it provides a safer space for families with kids to get together, and everyone is invited to those. It's not just for families and kids. I've thought about the hugging thing, and I think that's something that I think our regathering work group needs to talk about a little bit. Is that kind of, do we ask that people distance in the sanctuary, but then if you're outside the church and see someone you ask. I think consent culture is very informative for how we approach all of this stuff, but we'll need to think about when and where we ask folks to do something versus give people license to make those choices. I'm not landed somewhere. If anybody else has wisdom on that, that's great. And Kim, I don't know if you want to talk any about kids and all of that.
So the Children's Council is meeting again tonight, and we are having ongoing conversations about generally how families can be present and be safe. But as far as the outdoor sessions this summer, we really hope that people will use that as a chance to come back together outside, because for right now, that's clearly the best way for us to be face to face with each other. And Betsy Armentrout, one of our members and a pediatrician, gave us some really great guidelines about how to structure that, really taking advantage of the fact that outside masks would not be necessary for everybody until you come in close to something like a craft table. If you're going to be working on something together, everybody has a mask, everybody puts their mask back on. We don't have, I don't think, one of the things that we need to talk about is if the themes are around table and food, are we going to be providing it and how? So that's still a discussion that we're having. But these gatherings will sort of be crafted on a story, like everybody hearing one of these stories together and doing some activities outside and just beginning to move back into that space where we know how to interact with each other again. And so I hope that a lot of people will take advantage of that and come this summer. Right now, we do have them planned all for outdoor spaces, either in a park or, possibly in a backyard where it's big enough. But yeah, does anybody have any questions about those at this point?
I'm smiling at Lisa's suggestion that we all just do Wakanda forever, and have another way to joyfully signal our love of each other.
I see Dr. Lord is in our group today. I would love to hear his perspective on this topic as well, if he'd be willing. And I know there are other medical folks that are a part of these conversations too, but if he's willing, I'd love to hear his thoughts.
And if you are talking, we can't hear you. So can't tell if you have come off mute or not, or just simply not available, which is of course fun as well.
I'm actually not seeing.
Oh, you may have come off. Yeah, I don't think he's in there now, Eva.
Okay. All right.
However, he is.
But he's on our regathering work group. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I know has shared things about how different people, even in similar demographics or similar situations, can still have a very different place of comfort or need. He, has referenced people in their 90s, and choosing what is right or good for them can be very different. And holding that space that folks are going to be all along those different spectrums.
I realize I skipped over Judy's question about offering our building as a site for a vaccination clinic. I have been in conversation with Angela Brown at Wake Forest Baptist about that possibility. We have not quite landed on kind of a group to really target to make it effective. And so that's a conversation that's ongoing. I have reached out to Shalom about whether that might be something of use for their folks. So it's been discussed, but not nailed down or not yet clear how that might work. If you have ideas about that, I'd love to hear it.
I think one thing that's important to be said in this space as well is that we will all need to show up, whether that's physically or not, in different ways, in helping make this possible. This will have, even for folks who did sound before, sound now is a need, but different. And there will be new needs that we haven't had for volunteers and staff shifting their own ways and what they're doing to help make all of this possible. It will take a village for us to regather. So just, asking folks to be open and ready and think about what part you can play to help us do that. Kim.
I want to piggyback on that to say it's also going to take a village to get the building ready, period, for people to be back in it. And typically in the past, we have called a work day and said, y'all come, and some people do, and we're always grateful for that, but we're going to approach it a little bit differently this time, because there really is a fair amount of work that needs to be done to get the building clean. So instead of one work day, everybody show up, we are going to be publishing, here's what needs to be done. Your family friend group, like, create a pod for yourself and you sign up to come do that when you can do that, instead of just having a date that everybody is there, kind of, making it more amenable to people's schedules. But that's going to be happening through the summer and the run up to getting back into the building. So I just say that to say, be aware, read your green light. It's going to be more important than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because we'll need folks to help get the building ready. We will need volunteers who can do cleaning before and after services. We will need volunteers who can greet people and make sure that everyone coming in the building understands the expectations, because I don't need to be running around doing all of that by myself. I'm going to need y'all's help. So there will be a lot of opportunities for you all to make it possible for us to regather. And just briefly on church vaccination clinics. So this is Wake Forest Baptist would be doing all of this. We would just be hosting a site. And actually the most recent conversation I had, they have a mobile clinic that they may choose to bring at some point that I think is a little more self-contained and actually wouldn't even involve like setting up inside the building. So there's some options for that. And yes, Judy, right now I'm on the let's just ask folks to wear masks when they're indoors camp, and we'll keep talking about that as we move forward, but want folks to feel safe coming.
We've talked about several different groups, like parts of our one body. I think one that I had not thought about until the survey results came in We have folks who have joined us and never been in our building because they have joined us. Hi, Julie. Thanks. Yes. And the idea of how do I navigate coming back when I've literally never been in the building and don't know where to go, or if there's a Sunday school, or so we're in so many different places, and that's one of the things that will take more volunteers to do this together.
Yeah, and it kind of makes me think we've all been away from the building for so long. Even some of us who were around a long time before might have forgotten how some things work, and we'll have new practices. So I think being hospitable to others and even to ourselves as we figure this out, I think is important. Yes, we will be calling on the ushers for their support. Absolutely, Pete.
Members meeting is an interesting idea, a way to at least hear some questions, even if we don't have the answers to them. Some of them we might be able to answer. And taking this at a step at a time, planning, knowing ultimately where we want to get to, but figuring out what are the next best steps and learning as we go allows us to shift and adjust. Because the context is certainly not static.
Everything we do will be for now.
I really hate bringing this up because this is so project managery. Is there a pew matrix? Has anyone thought of developing one for this? Do we have a,
Oh, go ahead.
Well, yeah, pew matrix. Oh, God, I hate those. But because a lot of this is weighted decisions, and there would probably be a gathering or a number of gates that we would be going through in our reopening, that may be something we would like to use to present and organize stuff with. The other one is like you said, there's a lot of things to reopen the church. Does someone have a list mapped out of these are the steps, and are they aligned with which levels we're opening? If we're just opening for early service, we may not have a full nursery available. And later there would be a time where we pass a threshold of where we would need the nursery. Is all that mapped out by our reopening committees?
It's all of that has at least been discussed, if not clearly defined. Staff has sort of talked through parts of the building, as Kim was mentioning, these sort of different places that we know maybe the sanctuary is the first thing to address if we're going to start the early service sooner than later. I know Kim has said that families have said they don't feel the need to have a nursery right away. So that piece may be further down the line. So we've at least talked that through, but haven't specifically outlined that. We will be doing that probably in the next week or so. And back to handicap entrance, we have a newly paved driveway on that side, which is great. So hopefully that will make it easier for folks to get in through that side door. Yeah, and I've thought a little bit about signage, making sure it's very clear where people go and how to do all of that. As Kim answered Jenny's question, that we have been in the building, not every day. We're also working from home to some degree, but been in the building a good bit, especially as Kim has been learning pieces of Heather's stuff.
I see you, Joy. Make sure that door is wide open to be able to come in on the sides. Neil. Oh, you went off video instead of off mute. We can stare.
Okay. This is kind of along the lines of Edith Ann's question, but it's something that I've been thinking about this week. Since we have not been together in so long, and since we do have new people who are joining us, I feel like we almost need a reintroduction to ourselves. The long timers and the brand new people. And, I would hope that we can add that as part of what we do, just so we're reacquainting ourselves with each other and getting to know new people.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. I think that some of the programming that Kim is working on could be really good opportunities for that, since it's more sort of fellowship gathering based. I think I liked Kate's idea of encouraging folks to fellowship outdoors after a service, and there may be ways that we can better facilitate to make sure that folks are making connections, because I with all these precautions in place, it's a little harder for us to give like the Green Street welcome that is so thoroughly embodied usually at the 11 o'clock service. But yeah, and Katie is suggesting maybe the Introducing Green Street could include a member highlight time too. And we haven't been using Introducing Green Street in worship, so I think that could be a good thing to start to bring back, just to give especially new folks some faces other than mine and Kim's and Maria's and Heather's.
Even this time, the regathering committee, this time, like it also feels like this is regathering, to start seeing faces that aren't staff faces and see staff faces and be able to talk with them is a step forward. Hearing Reed say how much he misses all of us was like, okay, I've seen Reed, I've heard his voice. It's one step back. Somebody said in a small outdoor gathering, kind of my first time with people in a new way, it's like, can we do it this way? I still need to practice my social skills. We're all in this journey, whether it's this church or not. I've seen in Twitter, there's new hashtag of Zoom or the room, like this push of, it's often better if everybody's in one place or the other, so that even if you're in the office, you should sign on to Zoom. We're all going to learn in our different ways that we gather about how to do this. Yeah, that's a good question, Joy. We thought, I know that's been at least raised, certainly not solved, of are there so many people that you open the doors for early worship and like, I'm here, and there's 100 of us.
Yeah, and that's I have welcome to my panic dream, Joy. Just kidding. So yes, so the early service, and I'm realizing too that that was a very small service before COVID, and a lot of folks don't actually even know what happened at that service. Now, it was literally silence, a brief song, scripture, sermon, communion, and very simple. The folks that came, that was exactly what they wanted, that simple, quiet, contemplative service. And even if we change things up a little bit, that general mood of simple, no band or choir, or, not a lot of emphasis on music, that may not be what a lot of people identify with as Green Street worship. If you're really attached to what the 11 o'clock service had been, that may not be what you want. So I'm like kind of hoping that will mean the numbers will stay low enough to be safe, and that just the folks who really want to be in the building will come. But I've thought through what overflow might look like, or what, and as Lisa said, not many people wake up that early. So anyway, that is an unknown. But my catastrophizing brain is making all kinds of contingency plans for which would be a great joy to have too many people, but also a real thing to deal with. So
there may be a separate early worship outside simultaneously. If
you may really need to clean up the prayer garden in the middle of the building.
Any thoughts on having people sign up to show up?
So here, I'm gonna turn that back around, because yes, I have thought about that, and I'm not convinced that people will do it. So would you register? Does does that create a barrier to hospitality? Or yeah, thoughts. I'm going to open that up. Thoughts on that?
Well, I have known of other churches that are reopening and they ask people to sort of reserve a spot.
Yes. Yeah.
And from what I've heard, people don't mind doing that. It sort of goes against my grain to think about having to reserve a spot for church, you know, but if that would allay some of the fears and catastrophes, maybe it's worth considering. I don't know.
Yeah. So David says it discriminates based on access to technology. So that, I mean, that's
Jenny, I know you
not
raised
wrong.
your hand too.
Who raised their hand? Sorry.
Jenny.
Oh, Jen.
I agree with what David said, and that is what churches, there are other churches that made that decision, you know, months and months and months ago, and they literally have it set up where there's a almost like a theater seating or a concert seating where you literally select your seat. And so there's presumably an extra expense associated with that, but it ensures that we know how many to expect and know who they are. And I agree completely with David that if you're not comfortable with, or you don't have access to that technology, that may just be completely out of the question.
We've talked about the scenario and what do you do if someone else shows up, if someone comes in off the street that has not been connected to us before, and do you turn them away because of that? Julie, I saw your hand raised.
Yeah, I was going to say the church where I have my secondary appointment back in Maryland did this several months ago when they reopened, and it worked sort of. And they had a backup if you didn't have a computer, so you couldn't, go to the Sign Up Genius or whatever to sign up. You could call the office and you could reserve your spot that way. But they got rid of it. They decided they didn't need it. There weren't so many people flocking back to the building that it was necessary. So, and I talked to a few other colleagues who decided that they didn't need to keep doing it either. They tried it for a few weeks and decided it wasn't necessary. So, and as far as the hospitality part, you have the reservation to give you an idea of how many people are coming, but you always are welcome to others who come in. But yeah, the overall consensus that I got from my colleagues who were doing this was, yeah, we tried it, but it wasn't worth it. So
that's great.
Yeah, yeah, I have heard the exact same thing from other colleagues that the numbers of folks coming back are low, and Kate has referenced this webinar that we were on that said estimated 30% of folks will not come back to in-person worship, and that is sad, but also and you know what, if Green Street, so here, I'm just thinking that our numbers will not be that big and that we'll be able to manage it and it will be fine. If Green Street blows my mind and shows up in huge numbers, I would be thrilled to figure out how to have multiple services or do whatever. But that's something that I feel like we're just not going to know until we start doing it. We're going to build the plane as we fly it. And that is not my MO, but it's also just kind of what we've got. So I think we'll see. I do want to address a couple of things. Thank you, Kate, for being here. A couple of things that have come up. So outside has been mentioned a few times. If you think about our outdoor space, it's very challenging. There's not a lot of room to spread out without spilling into the street. So yes, if there were a small group who showed up for worship early and it were a beautiful day outside and we all collectively decided to go sit on the steps, maybe we could do that. It's I wish we had a lawn. Man, if we had Christ Moravian's lawn, we would have been having worship months ago, right? It's challenging, especially if we get to where we're doing 11 o'clock and having musicians and still trying to live stream, that just becomes a whole nightmare. And I know Lisa mentioned the basement. That basement is smaller than the sanctuary too. So that, but I've thought about the possibility if we needed to do like overflow into either the basement or the chapel. That's something that we can look at. Yes, Christ Moravian has been doing worship on their lawn. Woo, sorry, we got a whole bunch of comments coming in, so I'm getting
Good self-confidence.
Amira says, I think the early start time will trim the numbers. I think that is true. And yes, we can be prepared with some overflow space and some backup plans just to make sure. Reed mentioned the park. I know that came up. Thank you, Edith Ann. Yes, the basement not handicap accessible, so that's true. Okay. Ooh, and Joyce said that as well. Y'all are on it. The park, yes. So we in those 3 buckets that I talked about, one of those was outdoor worship. So then we would look at either Granville Park or somewhere else. I've seen y'all's worship in Granville Park, and it is not distanced. That is a difficult space. So we'll look at some options. Actually, last fall we were looking at Miller Park at the amphitheater there as a possibility. So there are some options, but we'll look into that. That to me is not tenable for like a weekly kind of thing, at least just not for me. In terms of like capacity or whatever, but certainly want to look at doing that at least once, maybe multiple times over the summer and fall. We'll kind of have to play it and see.
Yes, and to Chris and Katie, I think that, you know, having plans of some different scenarios in those first few times that there's gatherings, including knowing that some of us may shift outside or step into other places or take care of other things to make it work. I think this will require flexibility and kind of dancing in the moment and being with that ambiguity that we're not going to be able to predict everything. I think that's one reason the Regathering Committee wanted to start with because it is not predictable and we haven't been here before. When things come up, on what basis will we make the decisions? Even though they will be flawed and imperfect and we'll try again. But if we're making those decisions and staff is making decisions as we go along, based on what in this situation do we think lives most into hospitality and equity and inclusion and safety and relationships.
Absolutely. Yeah, so Pete, I think that's a very interesting comment. So first service back in my mind should be a great celebration. It seems like we are planning a way to sneak back into in-person worship. We are planning a way to sneak back into in-person worship because I do not yet, and a lot of other people do not yet feel comfortable with what it would take to make it a great celebration. I'm remembering last year, last March, clergy were circulating memes of what it would be like when the day we came back into worship, and it's people screaming and hugging each other and dancing and no, like we can't do that yet. And so there is this tension of we could wait until we were able to do full on 11 o'clock Green Street worship as you remember it, but we don't know how long that will be. And so what we're trying to do is give some folks, like the folks who just really want to be in person, really want to be in that space, an opportunity to do that. And then we'll get to the celebration. And I really wish it were clearer cut than that. I wish that we could just pull out all the stops and our first service back be a total blowout. And maybe once we get to a place where we're more comfortable, we can have a retroactive celebration reboot service. I don't know. Because I definitely resonate with that, and we're just in a challenging place of figuring that out.
Yeah.
Come to our Saturday gatherings outdoors and celebrate. Be happy that we're all together, and that's a different space, and it's not exactly being back in our sanctuary and worship, but that setting does allow us to be a little bit more free with each other and happy just to be in each other's presence. So maybe instead of being so focused on what's going to happen at 11, when it's going to happen at 11, just to use all these opportunities that are being put out there to come back into relationship with each other.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kim, because I think this whole time I've said, let's not just get stuck on worship. Let's not just get stuck on to myself. And now here, I'm getting mostly, and worship is important. Like that, it is the main way that most folks interact with us. So I'm not trying to downplay it, but there are so many different ways for us to regather. You know, our youth are actually going to meet in person at Washington Park this afternoon, and we've got a group going to Wilderness Trail. We're working on outdoor gatherings for young adults. You know, there are things that are going to be happening over the summer, and they will be celebratory in their own way. Even the Easter egg party that
Yes.
the kids had was like a total blast, and it wasn't 11 o'clock worship, but it was amazing and joyful, and you know, so I think that yeah, there's some of that. I've got a connecting group making plans for in-person meeting. Yeah, so I know a couple of, that's one piece that we'll need to follow up on, because I know a couple of connecting groups have sort of stayed connected over the pandemic and some have not. And so this may be a good opportunity to see if there's interest in reforming some of those.
I have to say, to kind of just go back to Kim's comment, I think, and this is something that I have in utmost vulnerability and transparency I shared with my beloved colleagues and staff. I think the pandemic is calling us to be something different. And as we continue these conversations, how do we give ourselves permission to be open to the new possibilities, the new ways of being community, and how we give ourselves permission to think about worship in very creative and different ways. And I think this opportunity of gathering outdoors on Saturdays that Kim and others have been working so hard, that's worship. Being in the presence of one another in very different ways, in a very different setting, surrounded by the love of God, that is worship. And it's not necessarily in the building, in the structure, but if you and I hate to get too theological and preachy, but if you remember, that's what the man from Nazareth, that's what he did. He went out, he was out with his friends, loving and caring and breaking bread. And so I think this is also an invitation for us to deconstruct ways that have been really inhibiting about how are we going to be, as Pastora Sara so beautiful shared with us this morning, the heart, the eyes, the ears, the feet, and the hands of Christ in very beautiful, liberating ways. And I think COVID is, as much as we've lost with COVID, we've really given an opportunity to be flexible and bendable and permeable and worship in creative ways.
Thank you, Pastora. David says we need to be theological and preachy. Yeah, I mean, this is a season when our theology serves and challenges us, right? That we have these deep theological resources that we get to draw on now as we figure this out. And yes, the YouTube link that Katie posted in the chat is not G-rated, but also I have seen it and I bawled through the whole first time I watched it.
Laurie, I love that metaphor of weaving the new cloth, retelling our new story. What our new story is, we face the centennial, my goodness. So we do have a beautiful gift of being able to tell a new story as we weave a new cloth. That's exquisite. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, so that was some of the tension that I was pointing to in my sermon this morning, that a part of me is I'm like, I want to brace you all for the fact that this is not going to be like 11 o'clock Sunday morning Green Street worship before March 2020, the great celebrate. I'm like, don't get, but then how do we turn that don't get your hopes up to, okay, what is our new hope? Like, where are we? We know where we've been. And there's a lot of that we want to regather and reconnect and bring back together. But then what's next, and how do we get creative? There are folks that have been joining us on Sunday mornings from other places who will probably never be able to worship with us in person. And that's a beautiful thing. We're ministering to folks who don't have affirming congregations in their areas. And that's important. That's a value. So we need to figure out what does it look like to be Green Street next? Ooh, okay. Here's a good question from Ginny. So, and we don't hate you. Has there been any consideration of a dinner, church, or evening service? Okay, so yes, not immediately, but the welcome table has long been a program of the Shalom Project. It has not been happening during COVID. Shalom does not want it back when it's safe to reopen. So there have been some conversations about the church reclaiming the welcome table as a church fellowship and outreach meal. Some kind of a possibly dinner church model has been thrown out there. We've not, those conversations have been very high level theoretical because we don't see it being safe to have indoor shared meals anytime super soon. But that is certainly something that is on our radar, and we have talked about the possibility of, could we start that with a cookout at Granville Park at some point, or takeout meals that the church could prepare and offer to folks. So what is the welcome table? Ooh, yes, I forget that we have new people. The welcome table was a Wednesday evening dinner that was offered to anyone who needed a meal to come in to our fellowship hall in the basement and eat and fellowship and just be together. And fun fact, I met my husband there, so I'm a big fan of the welcome table. Lisa says, too many people, not enough helpers. Well, you're not wrong about that, but that would be part of the reinventing of that. For me, for my understanding is that it would be going back to welcome table's roots, which it started as a church meal that community members were brought into, and slowly became kind of a service that some church members were still involved in, but more a service to folks who needed a meal, which is great. But what might it look like to get back to the foundations and the roots of welcome table? So that's something that we're talking about and exploring as we move forward.
So I just want to say that wherever we're headed, we can't just rely on the staff. I want to reiterate this again, to take us to those places. It is impossible for them to do all the things that we are hoping that our church will be able to do. And as one of the Sunday school teachers and part of the children's council, I will be honest and tell you, it is difficult to get people to commit to participating in that particular thing. And I have a feeling that is a very similar experience across all sorts of areas of our church. And so I get excited about all the really cool, exciting new things that we're thinking about, and, having Green Street 2.0 or whatever it is. But I worry because we have not in the past been as successful at getting folks to consistently sign up to help. I don't know how to change that. Maybe I'm hoping that this is an opportunity that can shift because people so badly want to be back. But I think, all of us here today have got to really reach out to folks who weren't able to be here today to talk about and recruit people to come help. I think getting the welcome table back up and running is a fabulous idea, but Lisa's right. It takes a lot of people. And it takes a lot of people who are committed to show up every week. And so, I think we need to have really important conversations about how do we get our church family to embrace that and really support it. So I think that's going to be part of our responsibility too, is to make sure that people understand that. Anyway.
To follow up, Eva,
I know Margaret's raised her hand too.
Okay, good.
To continue, I just think our staff has worked themselves probably to sheer exhaustion already. And I appreciate that. I love you guys for all you've done, but I don't want us to put anything else on their shoulders. And so if these things are going to happen, it has to be on us. We, not just us, but the whole congregation, but we need to make these things happen rather than thinking that it's the staff's job, because they're already overworked and I'm sure underpaid. So those are my 2 cents.
Thank you. Margaret.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in on that and say, Sarah and Maria, your words have been so powerful as far as, well, in this meeting, as far as how this may be an opportunity for a new way to do things and new ways of looking at things. And I was just gonna say maybe we should incorporate some of that into the Sunday services and begin spreading that gospel out to the greater community. And that way, as we're talking about regathering, we can get people's wheels turning about how each one of us can be more helpful and more useful going forward. And, you know, letting people know that we're going to need committees and, you know, whatever, thinking about your spiritual gifts and where you could jump in and be a part of making this new thing come alive.
Yeah, thank you for that, Margaret. We'll certainly be attentive to that. I mean, next week is Pentecost, like great time to talk about rebirth and how everybody has a part to play. So yeah.
And apart from the ways that it gets worked into sermons that come from a staff person, listening to you all say those things makes me feel like it's possible more than us saying those things. And I think it could be helpful for y'all to make some videos of you saying that, you know, to be part of services and to put out there, because I think that's a message in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Kim. Thank you. Yes, I will be calling on some of y'all to help us spread the word, because I will admit that that has been part of my fear, especially worshiping distantly and not seeing people regularly. You know, I'm like, if we do this, like, will people show up? Will people help? Like, and it's been very encouraging, even in the Google form that we set up. Several people have said, we want to regather, we'll help however we can. And I'm hearing that in this space as well. And so that is very encouraging, because that, you know, regathering is something that we're going to have to do as a collective, as a body. You know, I will work and lead as hard as I can. And you know, everybody's got to do it together.
Margaret, I assume you just haven't put your hand down versus you have something else to say. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing you. I don't know how to put your hand down. Margaret's just praising, like her hands are still up there.
I just shouted out to my 12-year-old to help me figure that out.
Yes, David, we need to figure out a way for us all to join together and take part of that load, so we can go further together. We're down to 30 folks, and I know I've got a little girl softball game to go see in Yadkin County today.
Well, any final questions? And if not, we can, I just want to say I'm so grateful to all of you for being here today. Really thankful for the questions, for the feedback, for the offers of support. I'm just very, very grateful.
And the survey is still open, correct? That form, sorry, the feedback form is still open. We know things come to us at different times, or you get ideas from other places, or if that's a more comfortable way to share or ask a question. I'm facilitating the regathering committee. It includes much of our staff, all of our staff that are here today, as well as others. Well, Margaret is staff, and Kate, and I'm trying to think of others, just to give you a sense of if there's somebody you want to reach out to continue to conversations and planning and next steps and your ideas. It's been super helpful to think about, to not only hear where people are, but to have some ideas generated for how to start to think about the how, not just the why we're doing this and the what that may come first, that, the early service or the intergenerational gatherings, but also to start to actually think about the how, which gets me really excited.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, at any time after this, if you think of something else, feel free to put it in that Google form or email one of the staff or Lori or whoever. Just, don't feel like this is a closed container and you can no longer share feedback. This is an ongoing conversation that will continue to unfold in the coming weeks and months. And let me know if there are any final questions. I have a psalm to close us out, if that's all right.
Margaret's happy.
Well, psalm.
Oh, still, that's cool.
Well, I mean, it has a song that goes with it, but it doesn't have the key line, whatever. This is Psalm 42, which I associate with "as the deer pants for the water," but there's a stanza in here that I had never paid attention to, and my dad brought it to my attention because this is a psalm that he has been sitting with throughout the pandemic. So I will make emphasis on the line that I'm thinking about. But this is Psalm 42. As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, my God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When can I go and meet with God? My tears have been my food day and night, while people say to me all day long, "Where is your God?" These things I remember as I pour out my soul, how I used to go to the house of God, under the protection of the Mighty One, with shouts of joy and praise among the festive throng. Why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Savior and my God. Thank you all so much, and we will keep your eyes on the green light. We'll be sharing more information there and in services coming up. And Regathering Work Group, we are meeting next Sunday, the 23rd at 4 o'clock. We look forward to seeing y'all then.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.